Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the power of our story. We are a place of safety for our protectors to process the journey together with others that get it. We do this by storytelling as our stories connect us. Please don't spend years suffering in silence. You can reach out to us at the power of our story and meet our amazing community that cares about you. They understand. So tonight, I want to welcome Dr. Pamela Arnell. Dr. Arnell was the Youth Service Officer, YSO, for Giles County, Tennessee since 2014. Before being the YSO, she owned Arnell's Counseling Service, Incorporated, as a contract provider for the state of Tennessee for 14 years. Dr. Arnell has been an adjunct faculty in Columbia State Community College since 2004. Teaching in the psychology program and some education classes. Dr. Arnell has been a member of the Giles County Fire and Rescue Squad since 2008 and is also a member of the Pulaski Lions Club. She served on the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network as the regional committee chair from 2004 to 2011. Dr. Arnell also served on the State Advisory Council for the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network from 2004 to 2014. As part of her dissertation, Dr. Arnell completed an analysis on the Tennessee strategy for suicide prevention based on the original national strategies for suicide prevention. Dr. Arnell became involved with 220 in March 2021 when the Giles County Fire and Rescue Squad Assistant Fire Chief asked if she would be willing to go through the training. One of the reasons she was asked is that Dr. Arnell handles the critical debriefing for squad members and her mental health training. She was doubtful at first and said, "Let me look at the website first. I have a certain way of handling the debriefings, and I'm not a cookie cutter type counselor." That's Arnell 2021. Once Dr. Arnell looked at the website and thoroughly researched the website, she said, "Okay, I will give it a try." In April of 2021, Dr. Arnell went through the training process and was astonished at how well the program worked. Due to my job working with children and youth who have been abused, neglected, and worked with them with their trauma, being in law enforcement for 5 years as a reserve deputy, a rescue squad member, childhood trauma, in addition to being married to a veteran, I am a believer of the process. Now, Dr. Arnell is involved with 220 Healing the Hero by analyzing data and assisting with publications. She has already successfully treated individuals that previously struggled with PTSD symptoms. And Dr. Arnell, I wanted to read your whole bio to show how much you are wholehearted into healing and how 220 must be something to catch your attention this greatly. So I want to welcome the executive director of 220, Dr. Pamela Arnell. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you. So first off, before I get started, I just want to say, I want to thank all of you for your service. Thank you, Sarah, for having me on. I see Miss Lisa. Hi. Kind of going back. So let me kind of explain how I got to be in the whole totality of what I do with the healing, just the helping profession. So first off, my dad was in law enforcement. Some of you are kind of young and you're probably not going to know who I'm talking about, but that's okay. But I swear to you, his partner was Barney Fife. He looked just like him. I remember him coming home for food and lunch and dinner and stuff, and his partner was with him. And I remember one day seeing him on TV, and I said, "Look, Daddy, there he is." And it wasn't him, but I swear it was Barney Fife. Anyways, I knew that I wanted to be in the helping profession, and actually I wanted to be in law enforcement. So what happened was, as I grew up, decided that I was eventually going to go into the academy. So in Tennessee, at that time, you did not have to be hired by a department So I actually applied at the academy, and they said, and everything was great except for my height, because they had a height requirement. I'm 5'1.5 inches. The motor vehicle people will not give me my half an inch. They said you're either 5 foot or 5'1", so I take the 5'1". And so basically, give me a little bit more, give me some heels, and that'll cover it. But my dad was not happy with it. He did everything he could in his power to convince me to not go into law enforcement, but being very independent. I grew up to be a very independent, outspoken, whatever my values and my morals were, you stand by that and you don't waver on that. And so he didn't like it when I said, all right, Dad, guess what? I'm going to do it. And so when I called him and said, Dad, I got accepted, he didn't tell me there was a height requirement. I even went in and told him, I said, hey, I'll go get some stiletto shoes, whatever. Back then I could do that. I couldn't do that today. And some of you don't even know what stiletto shoes are, and that's okay. But those are those real big high heels. I would have done whatever I needed to do. However, it didn't work out. And so I said, okay. So I thought I would go into business. I knew my heart really wasn't into that. And then they put me in this class where they combine letters and numbers and accounting and research and all that stuff. And I said, that person, I've got to, there's something wrong with them. For them to be able to take and combine letters and numbers to come up with equations, that's just asinine. Anyways, so I took 2 classes and I said, this is not for me, because my heart and my passion was helping people. I said, how am I going to help people, in accounting or with the business part of it? So I went into the mental health piece of it. My dad was a little bit more happier with that. He knew that I was still not happy completely, because I really wanted to follow his footsteps. It wasn't until much later that I was able to do that. It was way after he had passed, but I was able to do that, honor my dad for 5 years. So going back a little bit further, back in the 80s, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how old I am, you can just figure it out, but back in the 80s and the 70s, mental health was something that you didn't talk about. So I have a sister. Actually, I have 2 sisters, but I have one. And this is how it actually really started on my journey of being so involved with suicide prevention. What we now know to have been a mood disorder, back then it wasn't discussed. You didn't know about it. I just knew she wasn't quite right. And I kept saying, she's not, Betty, something wrong with her. There's really something wrong with her. And so she would, attempt suicide several times. And I remember when she would call me. So I was working at every single of those fast food places that you could imagine, because I kept getting fired. She would call me and say, hey, it's today. And I would leave. Well, I left because I was going to go get her and help her. Basically, the very last fast food place I could be working at, which was at Hardee's, on the other end of the town, she called and I said, no, I'm not going to leave. There's no other place I can go work. I've lost all of my jobs. Do whatever you're going to do, kind of thing. I was 16 years old. And she said, no, it's today. And it just felt different. So I remember taking an order. I was working drive-through. I was taking an order. And when you have just that gut feeling and something's not right, well, I had that gut feeling. I left. I lost that job. But I'll never forget the day, or when I got there, the way she was laying. I will never forget any of that. I won't forget the way she was breathing. I won't forget none of that. And what did I do? So this was before 911. This is when you actually dialed 0. Okay, that's as far of a tip that you're going to get as to how old I am. But back then, you only dialed 0. So I called my dad. I didn't even dial the 0, call for the operator. I called Dad, and Dad said, well, have you called for an ambulance? Well, no, I called you. You're the dad. I'm a kid. He's like, no, Pam, you got to hang up and call the ambulance. Okay, so I called, and they come. They were able to pump her stomach. It was at that pivot that, I was sitting in the emergency room and I remember Dad coming in and he said, there's something really wrong with her. And I said, I've been telling you that, I am a kid, but she's not quite right. And so it was at that point in time that the doctor came out and said, do you realize there's really something wrong with your daughter? And my dad said yes. So what happened? She was in the hospital for a while. She got referred to get some help. Today, she is a psychiatric nurse. She is doing wonderful. She actually works for one of the prisons in Tennessee on the psychiatric ward. She doesn't take anything from anybody. For who is it that's working in the psychiatric ward or in the psychiatric part of it, in the corrections hospital part? Like that was that Sarah, somebody. Anyways, you would understand that piece. So basically, when I was growing up, I knew that I would definitely, yes, Mandy. So you understand what I'm talking about when I said that. But ultimately, when I went to get my bachelor's degree after the 2 classes, I said, this isn't for me. People need to know. And so when it's something that I believe in, that is really passionate, I'm going to do everything I can to be vocal about it. So I got my bachelor's in the social science field. I swore up and down I'd never go back to school. 2 years later, I went and got my master's in counseling. Swore I would never go back to school. My mentor, Dr. White, said, I need you to go and get your doctorate. I said, if I do, I will call you and cuss you at certain points of times, and you'll take every one of those calls, which he did. So I went and got my doctorate in clinical supervision in higher education. And I decided to take that route for 2 reasons. One, I was also teaching as adjunct at Columbia State. But 2, when I had my counseling business, Dr. Cooper took the insurance. Well, for me, I'm not going to have the insurance company who would dictate to me what my clients needed when they didn't know anything about them. So I would always do a sliding fee scale. I did a lot of work for the courts. I had a lot of court-ordered clients that would come and see me, and they couldn't really afford it, and they didn't have insurance. And so I said, I'm not going to get licensed. Why would I do that? Why would I waste my time knowing I'm not going to fool with insurance and deal with them and them say, this is what your client needs, when you have nothing to do with them or know anything about them. So fast forward, in 95, when I was working on my bachelor's degree, I started helping PRN with the youth service officer, and it's Giles County. Sarah, I was just going to let you know. That's why I was over here laughing. It is in Giles County. It's Pulaski, Tennessee. And I worked with her PRN amongst having the business and doing all the other things that I did. She retired in 2014, at the beginning of 2014. So I applied for it. And I ended up getting that job full time. And I did that up until November the 5th of this year. Last year, 2022. I'm already in 2023. Did that till November the 5th of 2022, when I came on full time as the executive director for 220. I started the rescue squad. So we are a volunteer fire department, meaning we do not get paid. I joined there in 2008. My assistant fire chief was in the platoon with Ann, and he said, hey, so they call me Big Mama. Law enforcement here, because I've worked so close with them and got a relationship with them, they started that nickname. I am known as Big Mama. If you ask any fire member, if you ask any law enforcement in this area, they're going to say, no, that's not Pam, that is Big Mama. He asked me, he said, hey, Big Mama, I want to talk to you. And I said, what do you want now? And he said, no, I need you to go and do this training. And I said, why do you want me to do more training? Dude, I said, when I got my doctorate, I was done. He said, no, I really want you to do it. I said, I'll think about it. At that point, he had convinced my fire chief to go through the training. So now I've got both of them. I've got my fire chief, I've got my assistant fire chief, and they're saying, hey, we want you to do this training. And I said, no, it's quite okay. Everything's going really well. We'll just keep going the way we're going. And then eventually I caved because of respect. And I said, okay, whatever, I'll do it. And I said, after I do my research, because for me, I am not going to put my name. I'm not going to put my business name. And when I say my business name, anybody in Tennessee, if you ask anyone and they know me, they're going to say she is going to do what she says she's going to do. She will move whatever mountain she has to do that, no matter what that outcome looks like for her. And so for me to put my name with something or for another company, I've got to know that it is what it is and that it does what it says it's going to do. And I told him, I said, let me research it. So that night I came home, I got on the website and I looked at it and I said, interesting. Kind of piqued me just a little bit. And then went about my day the next day. And then they're blowing up my phone. Hey, did you look at the website? Yes, I did. I'm busy right now. I'm in court. I'm doing it. I've got a trial going on. I cannot talk to you right now. So later on that evening, we had our meeting, our countywide meeting, and he said, actually, both of them kind of pulled me into chief's office and said, we really want you to do that training. I said, whatever, I will do it just to pacify. The only thing is that Dan fellow is going to have to run me himself for me to see it. In order for me to be bought into it, I need to experience it. I need to understand it. I need to feel it. He said, okay. So I didn't think nothing else about it. I started to walk away and I hear him on the phone. Hey, Dan, I've convinced her the only way she's going to do it is if you run her. And I turned around and I looked at him. I was like, we're going into a meeting. Why are you calling now? So long story short, I took the class in April of last year. I went to the training. In between that piece, so, it's kind of ironic and almost an oxymoron because I hate research, but numbers don't lie. And when I say that, remember the part about the accounting and all that good stuff. When I'm looking at data or when I'm looking at numbers and what we use for 22-0, we use a trauma screen. We have what we call a pre-assessment. We use the trauma screen. We use a GAD, which is the anxiety screen, and we have just recently added a depression screen. But when you're looking at someone's score from a pre-assessment, and then after, if it's 1 session, 2 sessions, or 3 sessions, and you look at the post scores, there's a very significant decrease. And so I said, are you guys keeping up with this? Are you really keeping up with the data? So they did testing the model. I wrote a paper about it last year. That was kind of after getting involved with going through the training and submitted that to them. And then I really started focusing on the data. And I just did some random numbers or pulled some random stuff, and I'll give that to you in a minute. But basically in February, he asked if I would be willing to start doing, more coaching and working with individuals. Sure. In my spare time, I would do that. And then that's where I really started noticing those numbers, noticing how those scores were coming down. So I said, I want to get access and go through every bit of data that you've got so that we'll have that. He said, okay. So he did. Dan gives me the ability to do that. So I'm the data person, which is ironic because I hate numbers. I'm not an accountant, but I keep it with the data. One of the things that I did, because I know this primarily is a first responders, but I know we've got a lot of veterans also. So I pulled some data and I just did some random stuff. So basically with the pre-assessment, that on the trauma screen, 80 is the highest they can score. So I just ran it for 97. Okay, just roughly 97 first responders. The average was 46.14. After they went through the session, be it 1, 2, or 3 sessions, whatever, and I didn't pull that, I just did the pre and post, it was 2.59. So for the GAD, or what we call the anxiety scale, the average for that 97 first responders was 10.81. The average for those 97 after was 2.05. There's a big significant drop. Okay. So I did the veterans because I knew Tammy was going to be here, and I knew some of the others probably would be here. So I just wanted to do, I said, let me just do a random sample for the veterans. So I ran for 79. The pre-assessment for the veterans was 50.39. The post-assessment was 5.22. The average anxiety was 14.47, and the average post was 1.65. The numbers keep dropping. And I said, someone may just say, well, you know, I'm not a veteran or I'm not a first responder. Okay, so that would be in our civilian group. So I did 95 of our civilians. The average pre-score was 47.64. The average post score was 3.35. Same thing on the anxiety. The average pre-score was 13.85 for the 95. After the sessions were done, when we did our post-assessment, was 1.49. Numbers don't lie. And I promise you, I didn't add them up, and I didn't do the average. There's a program that does that. That's how much I don't like numbers. Okay. So in February, when I said to Dan, I want to start keeping up with this data. You know, it's important because we've got the two pieces. We've got where we're working with the veterans and the first responders, and they're free. They pay nothing at all. We actually pay the coaches to work with them, but our veterans and our first responders do not pay at all. I don't care if it's 1 session or 10 sessions, whatever it is. None of them are over 4 sessions. They're not going to pay. We use the telehealth. It's called the Mary Jane app, but it's a telehealth platform. And so they're at home, they're comfortable, they don't have to leave, they don't have to miss work. And then after we're done working with them, we do the post-assessment, which is the average scores that I gave you, which are the lower scores. The other part of that is we did the training. We do not train civilians. We only train the veterans and first responders to go through the training process. We just had a big class in December. I think we had 26, 27 in that class throughout the United States. We have worked with a lot of individuals nationally, and we have worked with a lot of individuals internationally. So then I get a phone call from Dan and asked if I would become the executive director. And I said, no, I'm quite doing okay with what I'm doing. You know, so he said several times, would you be willing to be the executive director? And again, I would say no. And the reason was I was really torn. So in Tennessee, or at least in my county, the youth service officer, which is an officer of the court, but works very closely with law enforcement and doing all the investigations. I don't know what the equivalent is to the state you're in, but we have what is called the Department of Children's Services. So the Department of Children's Services back in the 80s in Tennessee was under a federal lawsuit, under the Brian A. lawsuit. They're actually getting ready to bring that lawsuit back up because there are kids, you know, sleeping in the DCS office, staying in hospitals because they can't find placement for them and stuff like that. And I was really torn because I was the one that when DCS would not remove those children, and then I got contacted by the lead investigator, you know, from CID or law enforcement that was at the home and said, DCS is here, they're not going to remove them. I can't leave, Pam. I can't leave this kid here in this house. And so I said, okay. So that's where I was torn. And I mean, I debated, you guys, just my faith is really, really strong, but I kept telling God, you got to give me confirmation after confirmation. I wasn't the one and done on the confirmation with this because I said, I don't want the kids to fall through the cracks at all. I knew that the veterans and the first responders were not falling through the cracks. But if I leave, then I knew that those children were going to fall through the cracks. And I knew they would. And I didn't want that. That's not something I could sleep with, you know. And so God made a way, got it worked out. Next thing I know, boom, here I am. That's it. Anybody got any questions? I mean, there's a lot more, but, you know, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how I got to 22-0. You know, we use two different protocols. We have the trauma resiliency protocol. It's basically a disassociation. It's a visualization kinesthetic process that we use. We have the emotions management process. Those are the two protocols we use. We do not waver from them. There's no modifying to that. There's strictly a protocol that is set in place that has a trademark. And basically, the coaches have to go through those scripts word by word, line by line. And we have been very successful. Since doing this, I've been in Maryland. I've been in Florida. Florida was much funner because when I was in Maryland, it was in November and it was extremely cold. And I said, oh, I think we need to go back toward Florida, go more closer to the south. It was a cold I hadn't experienced except for when I was in San Francisco in July one time. And I said, no. That was a different kind of cold. Tennessee doesn't get cold like that. Basically, what we do is, you know, we do fundraisers. We have a lot of sponsors. We have a lot of donors. We have the Yance Valor. We have, if any of you have ever been on the website, then I hope you have watched the documentary. The documentary was released on the 20th year of 9/11. So basically what happened with that is they went to, when I say they, 22-0 went to New York. They interviewed individuals that were there on 9/11, and there was actually one from the Pentagon that was on 9/11. They went and worked with them. The documentary shows shows the interview piece of them before. And then there's the piece where Dan is explaining about 22-0 and talking about the process. And then the last part of the documentary is the individuals that went through the process and them explaining the difference in how they felt.
Dr. Arnell, it's wonderful to hear everything and just to hear your journey. And I think too, do you want to do a quick hands up? Who has gone through this protocol? Okay. Yeah, there's a few of us that have. In fact, Tammy, she ran me through the protocol. But you know, it's fascinating. It almost seems too good to be true until you get used to the idea and you hear about it and you're like, wow, this actually really helps trauma, really helps disengage that response, that trigger that so many people are suffering from. So, Dr. Arnell, it's just such a pleasure to have you here and to explain this. And I have a feeling this is going to be a really great conversation because, you know, we're all very connected to trauma here. So, Janet, you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for stepping up and for recognizing it. It's really needed. And thankfully, like I say, I'm in Canada, but thankfully I'm connected to this group and Daniel, and that one of these days I will do the training, but I want to do it live. There's nothing like doing training live. And it just watching the difference in the people here who have gone through it and just the community and seeing, you know, Tammy, when I was going through that tough period this fall, Tammy was right there, like just staying connected in that. And this is after doing all this other stuff. So I really, really try and promote to people that, you know, we can still get triggered and we're lower numbers and that, but it still can interfere with our life. and that to remember that it's we're human. And I love the work. I always follow Daniel's posts, and again, I want to thank you because this is really needed, and wherever we can support it, we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Sarah Marie?
Yeah, so thank you for coming on. I know that we had talked at one point too, you were gonna possibly run my daughter through the protocol, but it just wasn't really like the right time or maybe right fit for her. I am happy to report though, she went to the dentist today and that was a huge win. So that was like a huge win for her. In fact, she said the nitrous oxide was really nice. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she didn't have a care in the world. And when she was 21, she's going to be smoking pot. So at least she was honest with me. So now I know to watch out for gateway drugs and keep an eye on my daughter. So maybe she's ready for the protocol. So my question that I kind of mentioned earlier, and I was kind of thinking about this. So I have gone through the protocol a couple of times, and it helped some. And I've also been through like a lot of other stuff. Like I've done EMDR, like I did like extensive, like 2-hour long sessions of like EMDR and just like really like going through that stuff. So, and then tapping, I really like tapping, like the EFT. Tapping is really helpful too. And so today I was kind of thinking about it, and, you know, I mentioned my situation is more complex. And so thinking about it, there's really like specific feelings. So if I'm put in a situation, so for example, like helplessness, right? So if I'm put in a situation where I'm triggered to feel helpless, then all the memories of every time in my life that I've ever felt helpless just come flooding in, right? And so it can get really overwhelming because it's not just like 1 or 2 things I'm remembering, it's like 8 or 9 or, you know, and so to sit and try to remember every little thing that's happened to me in my life that made me feel helpless seems really daunting, right? And so my question is the protocol appropriate, or is there anything else that you know of where you're really running through more the feeling of like the helplessness and tampering that down, as opposed to actually trying to process through every single individual trauma? I don't know if that question makes sense.
It does. Okay. So
the reason that we go back as far as you can remember is we want to get the root of it. Mm-hmm. So, and the best way that I can explain that is, you know, when I think about helplessness and on my situation, you know, I go back to the times, or I would go back to the times with my sister, because I felt helpless. I didn't know what to do. I was a kid. I didn't know what to do. But going back as far as someone can remember to get, and the reason I say that is because it can't be something somebody tells you. It actually needs to be a memory that you know, and that you can, you know, we can get you to trigger on, and that you can feel. And so basically going back to get that root, we need the root when it very first started, and then moving you forward.
Okay. Okay, then that, yeah, and that's probably a little, because when I did the protocol, I did it more on just kind of events that happened kind of in the middle of life that like I felt were bothering me. And so like it kind of helped with some things, but that's why I'm saying like it didn't really like get to, yeah, it didn't. So it just tonight it clicked for me. It's not really so much a memory, it's a feeling. That is triggered that then makes me, okay, so possibly running back through the protocol again, but doing it more kind of that way. Okay.
And so, and two,
So, we've got the TRP and the EMP, and I apologize because I'm used to saying that, and I know Tammy and Terry know what that means. But so the trauma protocol, when we're doing that, we want to go for the trauma pick, whatever that trauma is, because trauma is going to be different for everybody. What traumatized me may not traumatize you. What may traumatize you may not traumatize me. Everybody is built different. And I'll use the example of me. When Dan ran me, I didn't realize that there was as much trauma with the fire department. I thought it was more with the law enforcement side. And I was really surprised that there was actually more trauma that I had in the fire department and running the calls, working the calls, and all those things that we see and deal with in the fires. And so it was kind of very surprising. But then when that connection was made of feeling like that, so and I understand what you're saying, I have to go back. I have to go back and see where that root or where it very first started. Once you go back as far as you can, some people may not remember being 3 or 4 or 5 years old. Then there's, things that we can do to kind of help get you to at least have some sense of feeling of an event like that. Then we have the emotions piece. So we do both of them, run the EMP or the emotions management part, and then the other part with the trauma to try and get all of it at one time.
Gotcha. Okay. I don't think I did the EMP because the TMP is when you're kind of sitting in the chair and you look and you flip the movie, right? That's the
TRP. That's the trauma protocol.
Or the TRP. Okay. Yeah. So I didn't do the other one at all.
So okay. Then you need to, because I'll give my number at the end and you can call me.
Okay.
And I'll take care of you. We'll
Okay.
get it. Okay. I'll get you out of it.
Thank you.
That's great. That's, I think that's what people maybe don't know as much, that there really are two, and that some people struggle a lot more with the emotional part, right? That can be where all the confusion or the complication comes in, and that can be cleared up through the second protocol.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to just put my email in here for you to have, and then my number.
Awesome. Thank you. Chaplain Todd.
Hi. As I said earlier, I went through EMDR therapy, and Tammy actually contacted me a little while ago about taking the training, which I'm taking a semester off of seminary, so I may actually have time to do that now. But one of the things that fascinated me about going through the EMDR therapy was the trip back wasn't at the beginning. It started out, and I don't know how familiar everybody is with EMDR, but you go through the binary stimulation exercise, and you're recalling the specific traumatic events that you experienced, but then you get into the discussion about negative core beliefs. Mm-hmm. And that's where I would tell my therapist, boy, we are digging holes here. And that's where it really, the root of it was finding out how full my trauma bucket was before I ever entered the fire department. And it went back to being a third generation first responder. My grandfather was a sheriff's deputy. My dad was a sheriff's deputy. I grew up in that environment. That was sort of what Stewarts did. And I think you get that. That set me up, along with the divorce of my parents, and how that affects us. I was 6 at the time, and so all of that was already there when I joined the fire department. And when my career was cut short by injury, then all all of those feelings of inadequacy and failure and failing to live up to the family legacy. When I came out the other side of all of this to look back at what that journey was fascinating. And when I attended the First Responders Bridge Retreat, they have a lot of clinicians. They have, I can't remember her last name. Her first name is Kay. She studied with Francine Shapiro in EMDR. And so, and she was fascinating, talking about the psychophysiology behind all of it and how it actually works in your brain. Is the TRP similar in how it affects the brain and how it because you know in EMDR you're taking all those traumatic memories that are in that short-term part of your brain connected to all of the the physical sensations that went along with it and processing that so it becomes a long-term memory. Is behind the scenes, is it similar to what's going on in EMDR?
So EMDR is more exposure therapy. What we do is you're not allowed to talk about the content. You're not allowed to share the trauma. It's based on the NLP, the neurological linguistic process. And, oh, where'd he go? Oh, there he is. So it's based on the neurological linguistic program. It's changing the neural pathways. It's taking individuals that are in that fight or flight mode or have those triggers and getting them out of those triggering moments, getting them to, disconnecting it from the amygdala, and then getting them where they're able to have the neural pathways changed so that when they think about those events, but we can't change the content. What happened has happened. That content's always going to be there. But reacting this way before the protocol compared to reacting this way is what we're looking at. It's something that you have to be out of. So it will not work for someone that has a mood disorder. It is not going to work for someone that has a personality disorder. This is strictly for the trauma piece. It's going to work for the traumatic things that you're out of. You've got to be past those traumas. In other words, if somebody's in, say, a domestic violence situation and they're still in that daily situation, it is not going to work for that. They have to be out of that trauma. So all the past stuff will be gone.
The other question I had was, one of the struggles that Francine Shapiro had back when she first developed EMDR was that just trying to get it accepted in the psychology community. I mean, everybody said, this is some voodoo shit right here. And I see a lot of pushback from the establishment psychology community on TRP as well. So how has it been to try and overcome that?
It's kind of funny. They call me the unicorn, meaning Dan and those, because being in that field for so long within that psychology field, even when I had my counseling, I never would expose my clients that had trauma. I mean, I never got and I would argue with my professors, why are you exposing them over and over and over and over? There has got to be a more simpler way. And it's funny when I think about it now that there is a simpler way. I just wished I knew that way back then. But basically, they're threatened by it. The ones that are in the psychology field and that's their livelihood and their means of income, a lot of them are threatened by it, just like they were when NLP started. That they didn't want to hear about NLP. They didn't want to hear about, being able to help somebody without them coming multiple times. Counseling and therapy can be used in other areas, but when it comes to trauma, why have somebody stay in that fight or flight mode? Why not get them out of that, get them healed, get all of that past stuff out of the way so they can do so much better in the future. But yeah, the psychology field, they're, you know, and I'm in the psychology field. I have a little bit more connections being in that field. I've surprised several of them, you know, the ones that were those analytical, diehard people that, no, you can't be talking about that. Yeah, okay, well, come here, let me show you. And so they're starting to see that, but there's a pushback. And a lot of it's going to go back to they feel threatened.
Thank you. Thank you. One more thing. Oh, well, two. A little bit of trivia about my background. I did spend a short period of time in Tennessee, in Franklin, shooting Yankees. I was a corporal with the 4th Missouri Infantry, Confederate Army, for a couple of years and reenacted the Battle of Franklin. And it was an awesome time. Franklin's a beautiful area. I want to invite you and Tammy back in February. I don't have an exact date yet, but I'm sure you know Kim Osorio. She's one of the subjects from the movie. She was my training officer when I got my chaplain certification. My certification is through the New York State U.S. Chaplain Task Force. And Kim is the operations officer there, and she trained me as a chaplain, and I'm going to have her on as a storyteller in February. So I'd love to have you back then.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. You know, I'm actually curious too. You said that it doesn't work on personality disorders or mood disorders. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So basically with the personality and the mood disorder, those are going to be some chemical imbalances in the brain. Trauma is an injury. You know, for so many years it was PTSD. Well, originally it was shell shock way back in the day, like in the 80s, when I was late 80s, when I was going to get my bachelor's degree, it was considered shell shock. And then that was because of being in the military and World War II, World War I, when they're coming back and they're like, oh, they're so different. And then eventually the DSM changed it over to post-traumatic stress disorder. Now there's this big movement because we know that it's more of an injury and not a disorder. Because a disorder, what is a disorder? If I think about a disorder, I'm thinking there's a chemical imbalance. With trauma and having, you know, like an injury from trauma that can be healed, then that would not be a disorder. Does that make sense?
It does.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I think even just, I mean, sadly, the whole shame storm that comes from being told that you have a disorder versus what it really is, an injury, and how they can even see that now on scans. I mean, I personally know people who were breachers who had holes in their brain. And once they saw that it was an injury, you know, they didn't feel so horrible and depressed and like, what is wrong with me? So, okay. Yeah, that's just good to know, because you know, you do run into people who definitely have personality disorders and you wonder, oh, I wonder if this would help them, or, you know, so thank you. Glenn.
So if they have trauma, I'm sorry, if they have trauma, and if they have, you know, anxiety and depression related to the trauma, that's one thing. But if it's actually a personality disorder, mood disorder, and you also have to look at people who want a secondary gain. Some people just want a secondary gain and they don't want to get better.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Oh,
they like that attention seeking.
Yeah. Not a willingness to heal. They want the attention seeking. Yeah. That's important to know what you're up against. Thank you. Glenn.
Gonna unmute. Okay, I'm unmuted. I just had two things I wanted to add, and I wanted to follow up on some of the things that Chaplain Todd said. The first thing I want to say is if there's a mustache of the year competition, I'm voting for you. I mean, that is amazing. I admire you. But the other thing is,
and so also know EMDR is under the NLP umbrella. So the NLP, you know, with the TRP, but the EMDR is up under the NLP also. So there is the similarities. The difference with the big difference would be with the EMDR, there's that exposure piece. With this, there's not the exposure piece. And then looking at there is some similarities because it is up under that NLP process or program, but we don't want them talking about the trauma. We don't want them, you know, explaining or sharing that content, sharing that story, because we want to protect our coaches just like we want them to get healed. But yes, there is a lot of similarities, but again, it's because it's up under that NLP umbrella. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you. That's now I've heard from two really smart people the same answer. So.
And, you know, and one of the things that I explain to people, you know, when I'm working with them, trauma is like and I use the onion. So think of an onion. When you're talking about the complex trauma, you know, we've unlayered the first layer of that onion, and then there's going to be more because that subconscious, which is in the back of the brain, it's like unlayering it. So you may get rid of the immediate reaction or traumas that you're having reactions to. Well, then there could be some others, which would go back with that complex piece.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just thank you, Glenn? Can I just hop on that question? If it's like an onion, do people go back to you when another thing surfaces, or how does that work?
So let's say we have our first session. The first session, whatever is the immediate in the conscious mind that you're dealing with that's causing someone to struggle is what we're getting at. And then we have what we call these weeds that come up. These weeds are going to be those things that are a lot lower or a lot layered under that onion. Those two could potentially be traumatic events. Some may be just, you know, some negative events that happened and they didn't consider them trauma, but they have some negative emotions to them. But ultimately, once we get that top part done, then you may, and are, especially if it's complex, you're going to see more things coming out, because the subconscious, you know, that's the part that's back in the back that you don't think about. What you're thinking about is the right here, right now. So with us thinking about the right here, right now, whatever I'm triggering on with this moment, whatever I'm thinking about with this moment, that other stuff is layered down there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Dr. Arnell. And then Janet, we might need to wrap it up with
yeah, I'll just be quick. I think that, and you can just comment on that, Dr. Arnell, that I know for myself, it was not one event like complex. And, you know, one being a spouse before I ever worked for the force, like some of that trauma that your spouses bring home, unknowingly comments that they say or things. And I know that the kids, lots of children of military and first responders also get that, just because we're used to our job and can't and don't distinguish. And but don't you find that with like military nurses, most of the first responders, firemen have that complex, right? I could never, when I was going through stuff, never define, because I know there was talk of doing what do you call it, like a medical discharge, but they wanted to know what event caused it. Like you're going through trauma, just even trying that. I skipped that. I just worked on myself, and did other work. But can you speak to that? Because I think that's important too.
So, and I hear several things within that. So I'm going to try and address all of them. If I miss any, let me know. But so basically, a lot of individuals, if they just have, not everyone has experienced as many traumas as some people have. There are some individuals that are not in law enforcement, not fire, not veterans. And so, and even in the not the mental health, but the medical field, I think about my sister, yes, she works in a prison now, but she did work in a trauma unit. She was worked in the trauma ER. So she saw a lot of trauma. That would be more of the complex piece. So what happens is are there several? Yes, that they can go through and do one session. They're not going to have as many traumas. Are there some that are going to need 2 sessions? Yes, because they're going to have more than one, especially for the analytical people. We're not going to do them in, a full 2-hour setting because they're too busy trying to analyze it. They're trying to process and analyze, and you can't do that. With the analytical part, we're going to do about 45 minutes to an hour. We're going to do one thing at a time. So if they've got 3 events or 4 events, once we start getting that layer down, then we may be able to get them on the 2nd session or even maybe the 3rd session. But for the most part, a lot of individuals can be done in one, because what I consider, going back to what I was saying, what I consider to be traumatic, you may not consider to be traumatic. And whatever my resiliency or what my coping mechanisms may be, could be a lot different than what yours are, and then vice versa. It's case by case. So it's, when I was talking earlier, not me, but when Sarah was talking earlier about, I'm not a cookie cutter person. Everybody is unique. And so while it may be the same protocol, Chaplain Todd, you may have to need 1 session, and Jim, you may need 2 sessions, and I'm just picking out names. So, everybody's going to be different. I may need 3 sessions because of the multitude of, first responder, law enforcement, and then the childhood trauma and stuff that I dealt with. Then working and serving and, protecting the kids. It possibly could have been 3 sessions. For me, it was 2. We had it during the training, and then the next day, there was another one or another session for me. Because when I went through that process, that night I slept, but then all the other stuff started coming up that later. It's like, oh, I forgot all about that. And I didn't think about that because this was what was on top.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in real quick here. For me, and it's the same thing that as I've talked to other first responders at the conferences and in other situations, a lot of them, it's a combination, big T trauma and little T trauma. Mm-hmm. Individual events that had a significant impact, and then in and along all that, the day-to-day experiencing the same thing happening over and over again, usually as a result of human beings who decide to do really horrible things to other human beings. And so you've got these big events. One of them for me was a particular DUI accident that killed the whole family. Mm-hmm. But then there were countless other DUI fatality accidents that you dealt with on a regular basis, and that just builds up over time. So I think those have to be treated a little bit differently, don't they? The big T trauma and that daily, everyday built up over time stuff.
Yes. And they would be, because what would be considered the big trauma, the capital T trauma, that would be something that would be done differently. We can also do what we call the bookends, getting a time frame. And that's one of the things that I do is so let's say you start it, and I'm just going to pick up some years. So say you start at 19, 99 and you ended in 2015, then I would want to bookend before you started and after you got out to get as much of that in there at one time. And then we can go back and pick up like what's left over.
Great. Thank you. Glenn, did you have a last comment?
Yeah, and I just had a last question, I guess, and it's kind of I don't remember who said it, but oh, I think it was actually Chapman Todd was talking about you know, generations of firefighters, right? And I've actually heard about or I've read about how trauma can actually be generationally handed down, like to your children, right? Or, you know, in the case of, say, military or firefighter, you know, a spouse can also be affected by the trauma that was experienced by the, you know, the first responder or the veteran. And I just wanted to, I was wondering if you could comment on what 220 does to try to help those folks as well, and if that's part of your process.
So our mission clients are going to be the veterans, law enforcement, and fire. You know, we'll work with anybody. Like I said earlier, they're not going to pay. I don't care if that's 1 session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions. Mm-hmm. So are there times that, you know, a first responder, a veteran comes in and they go through the process and they say, hey, my family, my wife, my husband, my partner, whatever, my children are struggling. Can you help them? We're going to help them too. We want to get the whole dynamic. So I've been working with a family and just finished working with them. And so ultimately, if you've got, let's say you've got a family with mom, dad, or, you know, whatever, and the children are in the home, and if we're talking with them after we've gone through the process, after they've gone through the process and explained to them and cleared that stuff, and they say, well, you know, I've noticed some behaviors with my children. Okay, well, tell me about that. Then how old are your children? The youngest that we've done is 4. Kids are easier. Kids are a lot more resilient, and children are a lot easier to do because they're so into those games. And with us doing the visualization process, it's easier for them. And so what would happen is, okay, I'll work with them. You know, if anyone comes to us, and especially those families, you know, we're going to work with them. We can't make them. I wish we could, but we can't realistically. And if they're not wanting to work and they don't want to change, it's, you know, if kind of being in that attention seeking part, if they're not wanting to get that help, you know, we can't make them, but ultimately we're going to work with anybody that comes in, and we're going to work with that family. If that family wants it, they're going to get it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Well, listen, I want to thank you so much. You know what I love about 220 also, besides for the impact that you all are making, it's just the heart of all of you guys on staff, the people that are trained, you know, Tammy, Terry was on here. I know that we've had people on this group that have had great results from it. And I know that so much is happening, and I want to thank you. Is there anything that you want us to walk away with from this talk tonight? Anything in particular that you want to reiterate?
If you or someone you know is struggling, I want them to reach out to me. I want them to reach out to 220. I want them to get that help. Be that voice, because a lot of the times people won't. Because one, they think it's going to be reported to the VA. I'm not reporting nothing to the VA. If it gets reported to the VA, you're doing it. I'm not. A lot of the first responders think it's going to be reported to their chief, their fire chief, or, you know, whoever their superior is within law enforcement. I'm not reporting nothing. They're not going to know that law enforcement and first responders or fire came through and saw us. It's confidential. I'm very big on confidentiality. I am very big on ethics. That is one of the big strongholds that I have as far as protecting those that we have served and are going to serve. So that is not anything that they have to worry about. If you know somebody is struggling, you need to let them know. Go to the website 22022zero.org, gethelp.org. My number is in the chat box. My email's in the chat box. You know how to get in touch with Tammy. You know how to get in touch with Terry. Contact us. We will get it figured out. We will get them seen. We'll get the pre-assessment done. I don't care if it's in the middle of the night. We're 24/7. My phone is right here. It's by my bed. I was woke up at 6 o'clock yesterday morning. When that call comes, I'm going to take it. I don't care if I was working on New Year's Day. We had an emergency on New Year's Day. Christmas Eve, I had an emergency with a veteran. I am going to take that call. I get up and walk out of church with my phone, and my pastor knows, don't mess with her. She's working.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. Thank you. And just for the people that are seeing this on YouTube, it's the number 22, and then it's written out zero.org. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Gosh, this has been tremendous. Dr. Arnell, I just wish you the very best with all of your efforts with Tammy. You also, all the people in the organization, just wish you the very best. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing this with us tonight.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And just know we're here. You know, you guys and ladies, none of you are alone. We're here for you.
Thank you. That's the big thing. You're not alone.